Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here today. Everyone has no doubt very busy and stressful and hectic schedules at the moment. So I would firstly like to introduce myself. My name is Rebecca from the Australian Permanent Mission to the WTO here in Geneva, covering agriculture. And before us we have a number of esteemed ministers, vice ministers and ambassadors from the Cairns group. The Cairns group met this morning. It was the 42nd meeting of the Cairns group. Ministers agreed to a statement which is available for the press. So how we will work today is that we are sticking to a strict deadline of 30 minutes or even less, as all of our ministers have other obligations to go to. So how we will run today is each minister will make some introductory comments. I will introduce them and then I will take some questions from the floor, from the media in groups of 3. So firstly, to start by introducing Senator Don Farrell, Australia's Minister for Trade, Tourism, Investment, who I think has been on the job for a total of 10 days, if I'm correct, Minister. So journalists, please be kind. Over to you, Minister.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thank you for my colleagues who have been able to come along to this press conference today, and thank you for the assembled press who've taken an interest in this part of the World Trade Organisation as it relates to agriculture. Now, as the chair of the Cairns Group, it was my honour this afternoon to meet earlier today with the fellow Cairns Group ministers. And it's a pleasure, of course, to be joined by them this evening. The Cairns Group has been the driver of agricultural reform for the last 36 years. We represent 20 countries in the Asia-Pacific, North and South America, Africa and Europe, and over 25% of global agricultural exports. We've always been a voice of fairness and justice in global trade, one that fights for the interests of farmers and rural communities. Agriculture plays an essential role in providing food, fibre, employment, production inputs and economic growth across the globe. With the world population expected to grow to almost 10 billion by 2050, there will be an unprecedented demand for agricultural goods. Meanwhile, world hunger and malnourishment are again on the rise. Food prices are at record highs and are becoming unaffordable for many families. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine is worsening this crisis by preventing Ukraine's critical exports of grains and oilseeds, and Australia condemns this invasion in unequivocal terms. The Cairns Group continues to call for fair trade, open markets and a rules-based system. As one newspaper put it recently, it takes a world to feed a world, and the way the world does it is through trade. Insular approaches take us backwards to slower growth, higher costs, food insecurity, and a world where those with the biggest budgets are the biggest winners. We all decided decades ago that this was not the world we wanted to live in when we established the GATT in 1948 and the World Trade the World Trade Organisation itself in 1995. There's no doubt we are at a fragile moment in the history of agricultural reform. This week, here at the WTO, we have an opportunity to set it back on track. Trade rules in agriculture have been largely unchanged for 25 years. Agriculture is the most protected and distorted sector globally. These distortions are growing. The world spends over $500 billion in annual agricultural support, most of which is distortionary. This is having a massive impact on the environment and sustainability. Agriculture and land use account for about 1/4 of global greenhouse gas emissions. The World Bank has warned that business as usual approach to agricultural support will see farm emissions increase by 58% by 2040. If we collectively fail to tackle this issue, we will miss our 2030 and our 2050 climate change targets. The Cairns Group calls on all WTO members to grasp this important opportunity to reform the rules. The stakes are high. Agricultural trade reform is a priority the world and the WTO simply cannot afford any longer to neglect. Thank you for the opportunity to address you, and I'd invite any of my colleagues who may wish to add any comments of their own before we take questions.
Thank you, Minister. I might hand over to Costa Rica to introduce His Excellency Mr. Manuel Tovar Rivera, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you.
Foreign Trade. Thank you very much, Minister Farrell. I thought I was the newest kid on the block. I've been in my office for a month, but I see that I'm no longer the newest kid on the block. So welcome. First, I would like to join others in expressing Costa Rica's solidarity with the people of Ukraine as it stands against the unjustified aggression by the Russian Federation. The human tragedy that millions of families are suffering is unthinkable for a peaceful country without an army as Costa Rica. Our thought and prayers are with them in these difficult times. Allow me now to thank Australia for convening the ministerial meeting today. It's been 35 years since the first meeting of like-minded countries that gave its name to the Cairns Group. We have achieved some significant victories since then, including the Bali decision on TRQ administration in 2013 and the Nairobi decision on export competition in 2015. And yet, much remains to be done. There are still many members, way too many, that despite what they say, are not really convinced about the importance of the reform process, about its benefits and the negative consequences of keeping the status quo, especially in domestic support. Over the past 2 years, members of this group have tried to change the situation by providing important insights into the negotiation process. The domestic support framework, launched in Davos back in January 2020, with its principle of proportionality, allowed us to go into the offensive once again and bring new dynamism to a process starved of new ideas. It is, therefore, truly disappointing that despite our best efforts and the incredible work done by Ambassador Abraham this week in Geneva, we will not see the results we would have liked to see, but we can still make progress. Ministers this week have a unique opportunity. We can support the reform process and advance the negotiation mandate by approving the 3 texts put forward by the DG and the co-chair, or we can maintain a status quo that is clearly unsustainable. The Cairns Group declaration circulated today is a testament to our continued commitment with the reform process and to the fact that no matter what happens at this ministerial conference, in July we will come back strengthened by the experience gained with renewed conviction and with more and better ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. And now I will hand over to New Zealand to introduce the Honourable Damien O'Connor, Minister for Trade and Export Growth.
Kia ora, and thank you, Don. Thank you to fellow ministers. New Zealand has been an enthusiastic member of the Cairns Group, not just because we are a nation that relies on the export of food for our existence, but because we understand the importance of food for the whole globe. And at a time when we have a crisis that has been compounded, of course, by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we all have a responsibility to utilise trade in a positive way to reduce the insecurity for food supply. It's not just about trading food, but that is necessary. It's about trading the components of food. And as we are finding now, the fertiliser prices and the inability to access is contributing negatively to the food security situation across the globe. So trade is the solution. If we were to export every single bit of food that we produce, we could only supply and feed 40 million people. So our advocacy for the freeing up of trade, the removal of restrictions, is so that the developing nations who have small farmers, who are developing capability in producing food, coming together in cooperatives to shift that food from one country to another or one market to another, they sometimes are undermined by the interventions of either public stockholding and then releasing that into the market, or through support in some countries, domestic support that distorts international prices. All of this brings instability into food markets and undermines the opportunity for many developing nations to be self-sufficient and eventually perhaps export in their own right. So we will always be advocates for the Cairns Group and what we can do for the greater good of the globe. We must also remember that in having inefficient subsidies or distortions to market prices, we waste labour, we waste capital, we waste resources, and ultimately the 1/3 of the food in the world that we produce that gets wasted contributes a huge block to global emissions. We have a responsibility through the Cairns Group to bring more stability to international food markets, more food security across the globe, and to reduce emissions and waste in every part of the food production system. So thank you to Australia for leading the way, and we will, as always, be an ongoing and enthusiastic member of this group. Kia ora.
Thank you, Minister. And now I will hand over to Peru to introduce His Excellency Ambassador Ana Cecilia Gervasi, the Vice Minister of Foreign Trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by expressing our appreciation to Australia for coordinating this press conference. The Cairns Group had a fruitful meeting this morning. We had the opportunity to exchange our views and perspectives about the WTO Ministerial Conference and, of course, focus our debate on the results on agriculture. During that meeting, Peru highlighted its wish for substantial progress in agricultural reform. However, if we have to accept modest results this time, we must see this as the beginning of a renewed effort towards our goal. We are confident that the Cairns Group will continue playing a relevant role in the pursuit of an open and transparent market for agricultural goods and inputs. The current situation in Ukraine has brought us to the gates of a food crisis, increasing the volatility of food prices and generating an unprecedented shortage of fertilizers. These negative impacts have significantly affected developing countries. Peru is the second most vulnerable country in Latin America to be affected by the disruption of fertilizers trade. Our government is taking appropriate containment and emergency measures in a market affected by continuous price fluctuations and uncertainty. In order to address these issues, we have diversified the sources where we obtain fertilizers. However, for this strategy to be effective, we need open markets, trade facilitation, and elimination of export restrictions. We must also cooperate and seek solutions to fix supply chain disruptions as soon as possible. These uncertain times show us more than ever the importance of having a predictable, transparent, non-discriminatory, and open multilateral trading system, and also how essential this is for a sustainable economic recovery. Let me close by ensuring that Peru, alongside the Cairns Group, will continue working towards a substantive reform of agricultural trade rules within the WTO in order to achieve economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable agricultural systems for the benefit of our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And now to introduce from Brazil, Ambassador Sarkis, Secretary for Foreign Trade and Economic Affairs.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening to all. As my colleagues from Australia, New Zealand, Costa Rica, Peru have indicated, we had a very productive meeting of the Cairns Group at the ministerial level this morning. We recalled all that agriculture is an unfulfilled promise which cannot be postponed any longer. The agriculture mandates of the WTO date back to the creation of the organization and are enshrined in the Article 20 of the Agreement on Agriculture. At the MC12 in agriculture, we advocate that a package is needed with short-term outcomes and long-term outcomes, both. Through the promotion of food security, we are negotiating a declaration on that. Through the support to the humanitarian mission of the World Food Programme, we are also negotiating an outcome on that. And by the setting of a mandate for agricultural reforms towards the next ministerial, MC13. That mandate would cover domestic support, market access, and public stock holdings as pillars of the agricultural mandate. At the WTO, Brazil advocates for the adoption of programs on domestic support which effectively levels the playing field. We also favor pursuing negotiations on reducing agricultural tariffs, which are on average much higher than for industrial goods. We support the declaration on sanitary and phytosanitary measures to ensure that they are taken based on scientific principles. Regarding public stock holdings, we are ready to consider any package that does not further distort international trade. And Brazil has put forward a proposal along these lines on PSH. Moving forward in agriculture at the WTO, the organization, if we move forward in agriculture at the WTO, we will foster food security through trade. We will also enhance economic efficiency and environmental efficiency in agriculture global supply chains. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now to pass to Thailand, introducing a close friend of Australia here in Geneva, Ambassador Pimchanok Pitfield, Thailand's permanent representative to the WTO.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and thank you all the journalists who are here to listen to us, what we were talking about this in the morning. Welcome, Mr. Ravi. You know, this is my second posting in Geneva. You are very famous, so I don't take things personally with the Washington Trade Daily, sorry. Yeah, this morning my horoscope said you should try to be charming rather than aggressive, so I will try to be charming as much as I can at 7 p.m. I think I only have 2 points that I would like to deliver on behalf of Thailand's expectation as a part of Cairns Group for the agriculture negotiations. First of all, we have heard all the ministers' excellencies that have touched upon the importance of the continuation of the reform package at the WTO Thailand fully subscribe to that we have work to do in the future, in the long term. Reform that touches on domestic support issue, among others, will be key to resolving this crisis that we are facing currently as a long-term solution. So I don't think I need to elaborate on that. All the excellencies have spoken before me. I fully share the views of the Cairns Group on this matter. There's another issue that maybe I would like to add as a viewpoint from Thailand is that just like Brazilian representative who have just spoken, right now we are facing with short-term problems and long-term problems. While the Cairns Group the agriculture negotiations that has been spearheaded by Cairns Group for many years are focusing mainly on the long-term issues, which is the reform. We do think that there is a need to address the issues that are related to agriculture, that is the food security or insecurity, depending on which country you are from. So my delegation, we would be happy to see the future after the MC when we already, if we have agreed and accept all the 3 papers, we would continue immediately to work on the roadmap that are in the agriculture paper, which is a long term, and also on the food security issue. I think this is something that the Cairns Group can be important contributor for the future of agriculture. My final message would be that agriculture is important to all countries. Maybe you see many developed countries are speaking here, many from Latin America, but only me from Asia, if you're counting Australia and New Zealand as part of Asia, which I hope you do. But I think that it is very true that agriculture and food and even environmental are related together. These are the future issues for agriculture related cluster. And I hope that this will be something that the Cairns Group will be championing in the near future after the MC. We have a lot of work to do. Agriculture and food are important to everybody, developing LDCs, developed countries from all over the world. We must make sure that the WTO deliver this time on the important issues that is vital for our future undertaking. So that's all. I know I have not been very charming, but it's my style. So please forgive me. Sorry.
Thanks, Ambassador. And then to introduce finally another close friend of Australia here in Geneva, Ambassador Jose Luis Cancela, the permanent representative of Uruguay to the WTO.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And let me begin by thanking Minister Don Farrell and his team for organizing this press conference. And let me also thank all of you, the reporters that are here today with us. Well, climate change, pandemia, bad policies, war, it seems a food crisis may be looming. So we have begun to talk from food security, we have begun to talk into food insecurity. UN estimates that it will be required an increase of 70% of agricultural production to satisfy the growing food demand. And Minister Farrell reminded us what seems to have become a kind of a mantra these days, that it takes a world to feed the world. Well, let me say that Cairns Group members are feeding the world. Cairns Group members account for more than 25% of the world agricultural exports, 36% of meat exports in general, and almost 50% of beef exports, and 40% of exports of cereals. In the case of my own country, our production is enough to feed more than 10 times our population. So, Cairns Group members, we have been, we are, and we will continue to be reliable suppliers of safe, quality, and nutritious food for the world. And how do we feed the world? Well, we feed the world through trade. Trade plays an essential role in achieving global food security and improving nutrition. I'm not implying that trade is the only component of food security. Of course it is not. But let me say, it's clearly an essential component of it. As it was put also by this famous newspaper that was quoted before, if trade stops, famine will ensue. So if we truly want to contribute to global food security, it's paramount that we keep markets open and refrain from imposing unjustified export restrictions of the kind we have seen in the last few months. A strong, fair, and rules-based agricultural trading system is paramount to allow efficient producers and exporters like us to feed the world. At the same time, we cannot overlook the importance of what we have done so far. The agreement on agriculture, reached in the Uruguay round, was a historic win for agriculture-producing nations. And let me say this, the agreement on agriculture was a great victory of developing nations, of developing countries, because we have not to forget how the agricultural sector world was before the agreement on agriculture. We must not forget how the agricultural trading system used to work in the past, when there were no clear rules, no predictability for trade, and when we were used to facing terrible famines, while at the same time talking about, maybe some of you remember, I quote, butter mountains, wine and milk lakes that used to flood global markets fueled by massive subsidies. Subsidies do not help. Subsidies destroy trade and destroy producers. We cannot let history repeat again. This is why in the current text, when sometimes we see some proposals and hear some calls that seems to be easing or undoing the rules that we have, allowing for further restrictions or distortions in world agricultural markets, members of the Cairns group, like Uruguay, must stand firm to protect the rule of law. We must reform and improve current rules, of course, but with a view to reducing agricultural support and protection, as well as restrictions and distortions in world agricultural markets. This, and not the opposite, is what will help us have more resilient and sustainable agricultural and food systems, and face the current and future challenges to global food security. All that in a context of growing populations and growing food demand. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. If you ever want to feel inspired about agricultural reform, just listen to Cairns Group ministers and ambassadors and it'll recharge your batteries. So I'll open the floor now to questions. I will take 3 at a time. And well, thank you. I'm just going to have to do it my way. Thank you. It's just that we're running over time and I am just going to do my best to try to release everyone to attend other negotiations. So I don't know exactly. I'll go over here first and then second and then third. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Doug Palmer. I work for Politico. In the ministerial statements that were just posted on the WTO website, the Indian minister says that resolving the public stockholding issue should be the topmost issue at this ministerial. I just wondered, is it at all possible to resolve it at this ministerial? And if not, are you concerned that none of the agricultural texts will be adopted?
Thank you. Second.
Philip Blankenship of Reuters here. Well, I have a kind of question that is more or less the same, but I have another one. What realistically, I mean, obviously there's a discussion tomorrow about food security, so what are the chances, do you think, of actually achieving those texts? And then what realistically would you expect in this sort of longer term agricultural reform declaration, which obviously won't result in a deal today, or at least this week.
Thank you. And the third, and then I'll open up for another set of questions. I'll come to you, I assure you. Sorry, it was the lady in the, yes,
My thing isn't working, but I'll just speak loudly. This was sort of related as well, but you mentioned your domestic support proposal, the Cairns Group domestic support proposal. And I'm curious, are you still advocating for that in the agriculture negotiations? Do you anticipate that that would be included post MC12 in those discussions? And do you have any other proposals in the pipeline of certain issue areas that you're looking to move forward?
Thank you. So 3 questions, one on PSH, one on what we can realistically achieve here and over the longer term, and another on the Cairns Group framework for negotiations and domestic support, and whether we will be pursuing another proposal here. I'll pass maybe first to our minister and any other ministers who may wish to take one of those questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. Just after the session this afternoon, I had a chance to catch up with my Indian counterpart. He's very enthusiastic about arrangements for greater trade between Australia and India, and I've given him some undertakings that although we've just recently had an election in Australia and everything stops in terms of processing those agreements, that we will very quickly restart that process as soon as the Parliament resumes in Australia when I head back. I got the impression that we could, I suppose in Margaret Thatcher's words, do business with India in respect of changes, and I'd be hopeful that in the longer term then we can sort out arrangements that both achieve the objectives of the Cairns Group, but also ensure that India is happy to be part of agricultural reform. What does the longer term represent? Well, we've got ambitions to provide a better environment for agriculture. We've made it very clear in our statement what those ambitions are. We've been doing this for 36 years. We're committed to change. We're committed to try and work with other countries and the members of the World Trade Organization to bring that change about. We're not going to give up. These are important issues. They're important issues for my own country. They're important issues for the 20 members of the Cairns Group, and we'll continue to work. We'll continue to work with our colleagues to ensure that the sorts of issues that we've outlined and that I outlined in my statement earlier today are resolved, and that we can progress all of these issues.
If I may. Please. Yes, thank you. I fully agree with you, Donna, and we think and we believe that PSH must be part of a comprehensive reform package with domestic support. MC13 can and we should try to deliver on both mandates if we work ambitiously on concrete modalities as soon as this ministerial conference ends. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. First, on PSH, first thing I would be, to be very clear, is that no one here is against PSH. PSH is part of the food security issue. and many of us considers that PSH is also part of the domestic support discussions. What we think is that, of course, this has to be an informed discussion. I mean, we have had proposals on PSH since some years ago already. And in 2021, many members, we posed many questions about these proposals, questions that unfortunately have not been answered up to now. Because you can easily understand that when someone makes a proposal, well, you have to discuss it, you have to know exactly how it works. In this particular case of PSH, we have to talk about safeguards, we have to talk about how it will work, because here the issue is, the problem is not with sustaining the poor farmers of countries. Who can be against that? The problem is that what we don't want is that this subsidized domestic production is put in the international markets, dampen them, with a damping effect on international prices of crops, and then creating great, massive distortions in international markets and in allocation of food. That's our problem. And it's so true that we are not against PSH that one of our members has posed a proposal, has presented a proposal on PSH that we, in the case of Uruguay, strongly support, but I'm not going to talk about it because I guess my Brazilian colleague perhaps will do it. What we really want is to help poor farmers in poor countries. That's the point. So we have to make sure that this help goes to the poor farmers in the poor countries. Because, you know, sometimes to give subsidies require strong treasuries. You need money to give subsidies. And we don't think that most developing countries has money enough to subsidize their farmers. So that means that it's not PSH only the whole solution to the problem of food security, because most developing countries has not enough money to subsidize their farmers. So for this, again, this is not a one-element question to solve the crisis. It's a complex and multifaceted problem and requires many elements, among them, again, as I said before, trade, which is an essential element of this thing. Regarding the issue of the reform on agricultural term, okay, perhaps if we had advanced in this reform in these last 25 years, we wouldn't be in the place where we are now. Perhaps some things in the agricultural sector would be different by now. So for us, it's essential that Article 20, Agreement on Agriculture, be effectively implemented. It's the longest overdue mandate of this organization. It comes from the Uruguay round, 1995. So again, in any case, we, Cairns members, are committed to make it work. Well, I will stop here, I think. Thanks, Rebecca.
Passionate advocate indeed. I'll take another three. Oh, sorry, please forgive me, Minister.
Just to support what was said, we are not in any way against public stock holding. Countries have the right to apply such a measure. We are definitely against measures that come with public stock holding that can be distortive, that can distort markets, price determination, and so on and so forth. Brazil put forward a proposal that contemplate the interests, the concerns, especially of LDCs, about 70 countries, that could generate by themselves incentives to enhance capacity and public stock holding. What we cannot accept is that a few could interfere in markets through their ability of being price makers rather than price takers. I think this is an important rationale because eventually we need the right incentives to promote food production, agriculture capacity across different geographies, particularly in LDCs. So over the longer term, we envisage a structured package that would allow members of the WTO to negotiate the different aspects of agriculture. It's not only PSH, it's also about domestic support and market access. So we can make progress in tandem along these three pillars. This would allow the membership to support advances and progress in agriculture capacity across all countries, developing LDCs, and so on and so forth. So we are confident that we can agree on a mandate, a comprehensive mandate, encompassing these pillars, market access, domestic support, and PSH, and deliver something efficiently, say, by the next ministerial, MC13. By the way, Brazil is ready to progress on a more frequent basis, and we had suggested that WTO ministerial meetings take place on an annual basis. So to enhance the organization, the ability of the organization to respond to crises such as food security crisis, and to advance more intensively on the negotiations, and also in the monitoring of trade, particularly trade in agriculture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to end this at 25 past to enable ministers and others to go to commitments at half past, which gives us 7 to 8 minutes. So I will ask our esteemed ministers and ambassadors to be brief. I'll take one question here, another question here, and a final question here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Ravi Kant. I write for Washington Trade Daily. Hearing all of you, there are some historical inconsistencies in what you say. For example, the Uruguayan ambassador kept referring to Article 20 while ignoring that there has been.
Sorry, could I just ask you to put your microphone on so we can all hear you, sir, and so our interpreters can hear you?
Is it clear now?
That's perfect.
Yeah. The Cairns group, despite the statements that were made here, is seen as anti-poor and anti-developing countries on several issues. For example, on PSH, the Uruguayan ambassador has been, firstly, to bring you to the institutional knowledge of agriculture negotiations. You cannot just skip Doha trade negotiations, which set clear mandates. I hope you have read Rev 4 of Crawford Faulkner's text. And it's very sad that today, there seems to be some kind of, ignorance or deliberate way to disregard what was discussed in that. And the second question is, the Cairns group is increasingly seen as anti-poor and anti-developing countries, because when you talk of domestic support, for example, you don't talk of the elimination of aggregate measurement support, because that is the issue for the Americans and the Europeans. And similarly, when you link PSH to the agriculture domestic support, that's also incorrect if you go by what was said in the Bali mandate as well as in the Nairobi mandate. And even a decision was done almost done at the Buenos Aires. One country blocked it, that was the United States. And today you took the role of blocking PSH by any method, by raising new issues. For example, you had said that the stocks that are procured in the domestic markets are invariably released. There is no information. You keep making these theological statements about, PSH stocks being released in the international markets and distorting prices. If you can show exact evidence as to which country which has availed PSH, India has availed it twice. I challenge you show this on, through factual information, and that will be the question. I also have a question for Brazil. We don't know where you stand. I mean, you had created G20 group for developing countries. You decimated it, and today you have come to the Cairns group. If tomorrow the Lula government comes to power, I'm sure that he'll bring back all these issues. These were the issues raised by Celso Amorim. In fact, the public stockholding programs was first raised by Brazil, and it was from Brazil the other countries took the idea. I mean, I can give you letter and verse of that particular, the line of how it developed. And to the Costa Rican ambassador, in fact, I'm very sorry to say your ambassador here created all the controversies in agriculture negotiations because she actually, copied the Cairns Group proposal on domestic support. She lost her credibility. How would Costa Rica can claim any credibility on agriculture negotiations? Thank you.
Thanks. Over to you for the second question. Sorry, just your microphone again, sir. Sorry to disrupt you.
I'd like to hear the views of the Cairns representatives on the idea floated to link trade and labour again, and if that is conducive to having trade and labour linkages in agriculture, as floated today by Ambassador Tai. And I'd like your views on food security, if there are any efforts to release some of the stocks in a coordinated way globally to put downward pressure on global prices. And thirdly, on cotton, quite a few of the members on the podium are cotton producers. The 205 decision in Hong Kong to get a cotton solution expeditiously hasn't happened. 3 of the 4 countries are now imploding because of social and political crises in West Africa.
Thank you. Third question, thank you.
Yes, a question on the fact that you mentioned with quite a frequency, the fact that you feed a large proportion of the world. How do you explain that some of your members face acute hunger? For example, in Brazil, 33 million people. In Peru, last year was the largest amount of people with, in hunger in the last 7 years. In Uruguay, there was a strike by unions on the issue of hunger. So what is the credibility of your statement? Or, in adverse, what model is this that feeds the world and forgets its own people? Thank you.
Some powerful questions. Thank you. I'll hand over first to our Minister and then I'll open the floor as a number of questions were directed to those we have behind the podium. Thank you, Minister.
Yes, look, on the issue of the public stockholding, we're not saying you can't proceed with that. In fact, we're saying the opposite, that that's got to be part of the discussions that we engage in when this conference is finished. So it's not the end of the discussion. It's really the start of the discussion. We're seeking obviously some objectives from our point of view, but we're happy to discuss those issues more broadly, particularly with those countries that have an interest in them. Those issues that were raised by the by the Americans. Again, we're not limiting the issues that we're going to be engaged in. If countries want to raise issues as part of the discussions, we're happy to have those discussions with those other countries. As to the level of production in a number of the countries of South America that you mentioned, it might be better if those countries speak to those issues.
Thank you, Minister. I'm sure a few of us are interested in also making some further comments. Do you want me to? Yeah. Okay, Ambassador Kinsella, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Regarding the hunger issue and the feed countries, I'm not, of course, talking on behalf of others, of my fellow countries, but I will talk on behalf of my own country, of Uruguay. And I have to say that, I am a career diplomat. I have been serving left governments and right governments. So I have seen many policies that have been applied through the different governments. And I can tell you that, for example, the left government that was in power for the last 15 years in our country, I used to be a vice minister of that government, implemented huge, very important policies to combat hunger. And thousands of Uruguayans were taken out of poverty, out of the line of poverty. Yeah, we have poverty. Yes, we have. I mean, we are a developing country. Again, and we are part of the developing world. So that I insisted with that. And yes, we have strikes because we are also a democracy. And now we have a new government that changed the sign. Now we have a right-wing government since some years ago, which has continued the policies against hunger in the country. But of course, these are issues of internal policy that the different governments address with internal policies, as said before. But here what we are talking about is global food security, or insecurity, if you wish, and the ability of trade as a component to contribute to solve that problem. And for that, we say that free trade, trade without restrictions, is a key element of that. And of course, if we impose export restrictions or restrictions on our own exports, then it's difficult. If we avoid that food arrives at the markets that need it, then we have a problem. So for that, we say that free trade is important to contribute to food security, irrespective of the domestic policies of the countries. And public stockholding in many cases is also a domestic policy issue, because many countries, rightly and legitimately want to help their own poor farmers to sustain their lives, and we have nothing against that. The problem is, what we intend is to create distortion in world markets, and it's not a theological issue. I will not mention particular countries here, but precisely for this very reason is that since 2021, we have asked, in good faith, honestly asked to the proposal of PSH how the mechanism will work, how they will assure that this, let's say, bad side effect will not be produced. And among these questions, there were, for example, questions regarding certain companies, which status were not clear. Were they private? Were they state-owned? How they were operating in the agricultural market? Unfortunately, again, up to now, we have not received any answer at all. But as we have said in our last COAS meeting, we are in disposition to discuss we want to engage in discussion, but we have not been called to discuss. So that's the point. And you know, we are not at all disregarding of the Doha round. To the contrary, to the very contrary, we are very conscious of the Doha round discussions. The only thing is that Doha round was not concluded. Yeah, it didn't become law, so it didn't deliver binding results. You know, the last trade multilateral round that delivered binding results was the Uruguay round. So trade facilitation, yeah, that was but in the realm we are discussing here, that is agriculture. The law we have is the agreement on agriculture, which of course is not rock law. We can discuss and modify it, but we have to abide by the law. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we can close it. Would you like the floor, Ambassador?
Very briefly, in response to your comments on Brazil, I would like to stress that, as you know, Brazil is a powerhouse in agriculture and global supply of food, definitely. Brazil does not have any more public stock holdings. We typically use market incentives to enhance our agricultural production capacity in response to the needs of the poor, and there are. We use cash transfers, emergency transfers in Brazil. Internationally, we do care about the concerns of the LDCs in using, for instance, PSH as an instrument to respond to food security. As I said, we made a proposal on PSH, which proves Brazil, and I believe many other members of the Cairns group, we are ready to discuss all pillars of the agriculture mandate, which should also contemplate, as I said, domestic support and market access, not only PSH. Our proposal on PSH, by the way, gives clear and transparent flexibilities for about 70 LDCs, which are price takers and would not distort international markets. These economies could use PSH in their toolbox if they wish. However, I should indicate that Brazil learned that much beyond stocks, we need market incentives through trade to develop further an efficient and sustainable production capacity in agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you, ministers and ambassadors, and thank you everyone for coming to.
Yeah. I just want to briefly refer to your comment on Ambassador Abraham's work as chair of the COAS. I'm afraid I must disagree with your own assessment, since all that I've heard all along today from members is her decisive commitment to listen, to help, to balance the interests and sensitivities of all. And I must say that everything I've heard all along today from many members is her respect and admiration and commitment to her work. So I must disagree with you.
Thank you. I am going to close it there. Thank you everyone for coming today. Well,
with respect, with I think we did answer that question. You may not be happy with the answer, but we answered that question. Thank you.
thanks everyone. We'll close there.